The man bought the most expensive first-class ticket every day but never flew. Instead, he anxiously waited in the lobby watching TV, seemingly waiting in New York, where a similar gas attack had occurred. A hijacking here must mean something serious was about to happen. Just then, a flight attendant received an instruction from a passenger. He opened it and saw a distress signal. "Terrorists are next to me." The flight attendant calmly turned his head and saw a middle-aged man in a suit. Image of an old man. The atmosphere in the cockpit was tense. The man held a gun to the woman's head and ordered her to keep heading west. Only in this way could she avoid the impending catastrophe. After the plane stabilized, the captain mustered his courage and asked the question that had been bothering him. "What does it mean that everyone dies at sunrise?" Johnson then explained that he was a NATO soldier. Just a month ago, he overheard a secret meeting of the organization's top brass, who said that the sun had undergone a terrible mutation, and all living things exposed to it would die instantly, even if they hid inside buildings, because this deadly radiation could penetrate ordinary walls and roofs. And since the west was the direction where the sun sets, they now had to race against the sun and stay in the darkness to temporarily save their lives. But judging from the two men's expressions, they clearly didn't believe what he said. Johnson was strong and didn't want to explain anymore. After all, he had control of the plane. But the captain's wound was bleeding profusely, and if he didn't receive timely treatment, he might go into shock, and then the whole plane would be doomed. Helpless, Johnson had no choice but to let Molly go to find a doctor. But as soon as he came out, he saw two flight attendants discussing using hot water to pour on the hijackers. Molly quickly stopped them, saying that they had guns and that they shouldn't make any rash moves. Then Molly went to the back cabin and asked who the doctor was. There was only one to treatment. The black woman and the captain kept exchanging glances, which Johnson happened to see. He warned the two not to play tricks, that he wasn't joking, and that the end of the world was really coming. After a moment's thought, Johnson agreed to cooperate. The captain then announced over the intercom that the flight's destination had been changed from Moscow to Iceland. At this point, a mother suddenly stood up and vehemently opposed the change, as her son was seriously ill and had finally managed to schedule surgery in Moscow. She couldn't let him be delayed. Johnson naturally couldn't agree. The mother was agitated and wanted to fight. Then, another male passenger suddenly began vomiting violently. Everyone assumed it was some kind of infectious disease, and chaos ensued. Unexpectedly, Huzenin, who had previously been suspected of being a terrorist, seized Johnson's weapon in the confusion, and the situation instantly reversed. "I'm saving your life. You didn't tell the truth. I've sealed him in the bathroom. Now I'm going to kill you." Okay, I'll kill you. Okay, sir. Please do what I say." Before stopping breathing. At this point, the plane had reached Iceland, and the captain was preparing to land at the nearest airport. However, he tried calling the control room multiple times, but there was no response. Then he saw a horrifying scene. The airport below was engulfed in flames, as if people were frantically fighting for the plane. Only then did the two realize that what Johnson said might be true. The captain immediately ordered Molly to continue searching for the next airport to land and refuel. She then went to let Johnson out of the restroom to ask what was happening down there and how to proceed. Although Johnson was angry, the situation was urgent and he couldn't dwell on the previous incident. After retrieving his weapon, he revealed the solar mutation. To survive, they had to keep flying west and stay in the darkness. But then Molly brought bad news. She had just searched all the airports to the west, the nearest being 2,000 kilometers away, and the plane only had 900 kilometers of fuel left. The only option was to turn around and fly east. There was a small airport about 400 kilometers away where they could temporarily refuel before continuing westward. Given the current situation, heading west would only result in a crash, while heading east offered a glimmer of hope. For the safety of everyone, the captain chose the latter, and the passengers agreed. Ultimately, Johnson had no choice but to compromise. However, just before landing, the left engine suddenly malfunctioned, causing the entire fuselage to lose balance and making a normal landing impossible. Fortunately, the experienced captain instructed Molly to shut down all engines and switch to a gliding landing without power. This method is only suitable for small aircraft. Large passenger planes have immense weight and inertia, and a slight mishap could result in a crash and loss of life. But there was no other option at the moment. To the back of the seat in front of them. The plane was preparing for an emergency landing. Thankfully, the plane successfully braked and avoided crashing into the houses ahead. The captain finally breathed a sigh of relief. This emergency landing experience would be one he would never forget. After calming down, he told the passengers to stay in their seats and wait until it was safe outside before disembarking. However, he underestimated the human will to survive. "I vomited, which is normal." Upon reaching the ground, the first thing they did was pull out their phones to contact their families, but without a reply. This time, everyone completely gave up hope. It seemed the end of the world, so he had to turn back to save them. But this plan was quickly rejected because, according to the accurate intelligence obtained by the three soldiers, everyone in the bunker in the country where the sun had risen had died. If they turned back now, everyone would probably meet with misfortune on the way. Although Nerai was very unhappy, everyone opposed turning back. He could only leave with a mouthful of phlegm and angrily board the plane. He believed that if the real apocalypse, the captain knew very well that they had to repair the plane and refuel as soon as possible to take off again before sunrise. Otherwise, Iceland would become their grave. Then, Everyone divided the work and began to scavenge the small airport, taking away as much aviation fuel, spare parts, and necessary survival supplies as possible. After talking, they learned that everyone here had escaped by plane. They were responsible for ensuring the evacuation of all the residents of the town. However, when they drove back the plane. Meanwhile, in the hangar, a girl secretly slipped a bottle of champagne into her bag while her companion wasn't looking. On the other side, another incident occurred. A mother with her child refused to board the plane. She didn't believe the myth of the sun killing people. Her son's illness couldn't be delayed any longer and he needed treatment at the nearest hospital, otherwise his condition would worsen. I'll drive the car to the hospital, okay? There are no hospitals here. There are no hospitals at all. Calm down. The flight attendant took the child away, while the black woman gave the woman a sedative injection. Together with Molly, they forcibly carried her onto the plane. As the cabin door closed, the doomsday flight took off again. John's calculations showed that to keep the sun behind them, they needed to maintain a speed of 1,600 kilometers per hour and had also determined a relatively safe route. Molly knew her mission was complete, so she voluntarily gave up her co-pilot's seat. She encountered a mechanic repairing the radio, but he wasn't very familiar with the plane, so it took some time. Fortunately, his efforts paid off. After half an hour, he successfully repaired the wireless network. Passengers went online to search for news of the apocalypse. Some experts analyzed that it might be due to a change in the sun's polarity, which released unusually high-energy radiation. This radiation was not ultraviolet or visible light in the traditional sense, but an unknown particle stream capable of directly damaging the DNA structure of biological cells. Just as everyone was discussing how long this reversal of the sun's polarity would last, Tiger suddenly showed an extremely serious expression because he had just learned a huge secret online. Am I being bullied? The man suddenly discovered 3 American rapists and murderers on the plane. They had broken into a civilian's home, brutally murdered the unarmed woman inside, and assaulted her 10-year-old daughter before setting the entire house ablaze in an attempt to destroy all evidence. Molly was momentarily unsure what to do, unaware that an accident had occurred in the cabin. One of the murderers found a bottle of champagne, a passenger's personal item, but he still opened it. The sound of the bottle being opened startled an elderly man with dementia, who mistook it for a gunshot and tried to open the cabin door to escape. When the doctor arrived, the old man was already dead. Everyone accused the man of being a murderer, but he argued that he was trying to save everyone. However, he claimed that cabin doors cannot be opened during flight, a basic aviation safety rule that the man, as an active-duty Air Force officer, couldn't possibly be unaware of. At this moment, the bearded man tried to approach to check, but the other man mistook him for someone who wanted to harm him and instinctively pulled out a gun. At this point, the man's companion stepped forward to calm him down, which smoothly eased the tension. Otherwise, if he had accidentally fired, there would have been no way to undo the damage. In this situation, it could only be considered accidental killing. High above this apocalyptic sky, law and order had long since vanished, and a single life didn't concern people much. What mattered more was how to survive on this precarious flight. Only Molly knew that if these 3 murderers weren't eliminated, it would surely lead to an even greater disaster. So, she quietly went to the cockpit, pretending to change the captain's dressing, but instead revealed the 3 men's true identities in Russian. You know what they say? When they speak a foreign language next to you, they often say, "Sorry, because I don't understand English medical language." Oh, it's not my fault, I was just joking. Fortunately, the other party didn't suspect anything. The 2 then openly discussed their plan in Russian in front of Tom, intending to make contact at the next stop. The captain agreed to Molly's suggestion. So, after the plane landed, the captain deliberately sent 3 murderers to search for the radio, intending to abandon them. However, the other party was very wary. This arrangement was clearly unreasonable. Molly quickly explained that the road signs here were all in English, and only the 3 of them could understand them. Tom agreed, but he demanded that Neri go with him and that a flight attendant act as a translator. This completely disrupted the plan. Refusing now would certainly arouse suspicion, but the flight attendant was unaware of this. Neri alone couldn't control 3 vicious murderers at the same time. But with things as they were, the captain had no choice but to agree. After the 5 left, the captain announced the 3 men's true identities and told everyone to hurry and find supplies, making it seem like there was no phone. He then instructed them to check the back of the ship. After all 3 had gone inside, Chongjing immediately locked the steel door and tried to leave with the flight attendant. However, this stubborn woman refused to believe they were murderers no matter how Chongjing explained. Seeing that the door was about to be breached, Jing had no choice but to abandon the flight attendant and rush out of the shop to get his car. Fortunately, the keys had already been taken. Luckily, the location was on the street, and a car was parked nearby. At the same moment, the flight attendant finally realized what was happening. But it was too late. This is the cruel post-apocalyptic world. Kindness and naivete often become fatal weaknesses, indirectly leading to her own demise. Meanwhile, all the passengers had boarded the plane, their faces filled with worry, hoping the flight attendant and Gabriel would return safely. If it's not Yakub and Gabriel, close the door. Molly then went to the co-pilot's seat, taking over the captain's position again. Once the two are on board, she'll immediately start the engine. Are they behind me or Gabriel? They haven't arrived yet? Let's go. Jing immediately went to the cockpit to inform the flight attendant that the plane hadn't boarded. The captain, upon hearing this, prepared to stop and wait. But the three men had already caught up and were firing shots at the plane. Stopping now would surely result in a fierce retaliation. Considering everyone's safety, the captain had no choice but to order increased power and takeoff. At this moment, the old man suddenly noticed a crack in the window. Realizing the situation was dire, he hurriedly reminded the captain to stop takeoff, but it was too late. The plane had already ascended to the western paradise. To prevent accidents, the captain had the elderly man sit beside him and watch. But he wasn't stupid. If the glass shattered and the cabin pressure leaked, he'd be the first to be sucked out. At this point, Johnson stepped forward and warned the captain to stop yelling. The sun has changed. The end of the world is coming. We're all survivors, so everyone has equal rights. These kinds of things must be decided by vote. The captain, used to being in charge, was naturally reluctant to have a democratic vote. He refused to vote, citing passenger safety as his reason. Johnson's words were reasonable, and the passengers agreed with the proposal. The captain was so angry he laughed. I'm the only pilot on board. Go ahead and kill me. Then everyone else will be killed too. Just as the two were arguing heatedly, the plane suddenly received a radio signal. The captain rushed over to communicate with the other party. After talking, he learned that there was a safe underwater bunker somewhere in Hawaii with food and oxygen, capable of holding 100 survivors. Apparently, the water blocked the sun's radiation, so the area was unaffected. This gave the captain hope, and he immediately asked for the coordinates. He unilaterally changed the flight path. Johnson was furious when he found out. So, after all he had said, he still considered himself the leader and everyone else the subordinates? This was just... Molly also questioned the decision. Hawaii is far in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it's unknown whether the plane has enough fuel to get there. Moreover, the identity and information of the other party are unverified. What if it's a trap? Everyone will be in dire straits. She suggested that they should first find the nearest safe landing point to replenish fuel and supplies, and at the same time verify the reliability of this underwater treasure information. Are we really having too much to do with a rumor? How long do you think this will last? How long will it take before something falls down and we lose an engine and we die? We miscalculated the fuel and we die? Oh no, we'll be hit by a train. Okay. Molly had no choice but to shut up. She knew the captain was under immense pressure. After all, from discovering the murderer to being forced to take off, and now heading towards the unknown Hawaii, every step had been a life or death ordeal. However, outside, the argument was in full swing. Johnson and his voting faction had completely monopolized the proceedings. Their demands were simple. Anything from now on. Okay, please continue. Having learned his lesson from the previous incident, the captain had become much more cautious. He came out and truthfully told everyone the news. Although the soldier couldn't yet enter the aircraft, if he damaged the landing gear's hydraulic system, the plane wouldn't be able to land. At the moment, the captain could only think of one solution: to climb the plane to over 10,000 meters. At that altitude, the oxygen and temperature would drop, and no living person could survive for more than a few minutes. No one objected. After all, no one wanted to die alongside a madman. The captain then returned to the cockpit and began to control the plane's ascent, simultaneously opening the landing gear, intending to freeze the soldier to death and then throw him into the sea. However, despite his meticulous planning, he completely forgot about the crack in the window. As the altitude increased, the cabin pressure rapidly rose, and the window could no longer withstand the huge pressure difference between the inside and outside, shattering directly. An ambulance was called. As the altitude gradually decreased, the suction inside the cabin began to weaken. Kenjiro Narwe hurriedly held his breath and found a steel plate to block the window, temporarily relieving the crisis. However, before everyone could breathe a sigh of relief, another accident occurred. At a critical moment, the bearded man came up with a solution. He used the oxygen mask tubing from the airplane to create a makeshift siphon device, which solved the immediate crisis. However, before everyone could breathe a sigh of relief, the alarm sounded again in the cockpit. Clearly, the soldier was not dead. The captain deduced that the man had survived thanks to the heat from the equipment. This man was like a time bomb and had to be dealt with as soon as possible. Suddenly, the captain had a bold idea: to cut through the floor and force his way into the landing gear to kill the soldier. But after these incidents, Johnson's attitude was very firm. Any decision had to be voted on by everyone. There was no time to lose. Johnson and his two companions immediately took action with spray guns. They cut a small opening in the floor as planned. Johnson was responsible for shooting the perpetrator. However, it was pitch black inside, and they couldn't see anything. Open here. Open here. In a critical moment, Huzenin took over the weapon and fired into the cave. After 3 gunshots, there was complete silence inside, and the 3 finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, when they returned to the cabin, Huzenin noticed that everyone was looking at him strangely. It turned out that the bald man had reported to the captain that when the plane landed last time to bury the young man who was vomiting uncontrollably, he had discovered that Huzenin had dissected the body and taken out a diamond from his stomach. Seeing that the matter had been exposed, Huzenin finally told the truth. To be precise, it was not a diamond, but a national gemstone artifact. He had hired the young man to use his body as a container to smuggle it back into the country. However, these explanations failed to convince everyone. Huzenin was temporarily locked in the warehouse. After discussion, the others decided to put the matter aside for the time being, because the plane would arrive at the next transit station in half an hour. 1.5 hours were used to scavenge for supplies and refuel, and 20 minutes were used to decide Huzenin's fate. What no one expected was that Johnson, usually his archenemy, stood up for him this time. Johnson knew there was a shelter at the next stop, but its location was unknown. Johnson felt that this makeshift doomsday team, besides himself, only had the most capable member, the bearded man, and taking him along would definitely be helpful. For everyone's happiness, he even made a guarantee. If the bearded man did anything illegal, he would be thrown off the plane with him. Ultimately, this is why the other person stayed. Thank you. I'm not your friend. I'm your friend. And so the doomsday flight took off again. The bearded man returned to the plane, glanced at the bald head he'd been hit on, and then went to the mother and son to ask if the boy's condition had improved. However, he was interrupted coldly by the mother after only 2 hours. Just 2 hours earlier, the bearded man had saved her son, and now, exposed for smuggling cultural relics, she was wary of him. This is the complexity of human nature and reality. In times of crisis, people can temporarily set aside their prejudices and prioritize survival, filled with gratitude and trust for their saviors. But as soon as the crisis eases, when interests, morality, or past stains are involved, that newly established fragility, friendship crumbles easily. Suspicion and defensiveness quickly take over. In the cockpit, Molly noticed the captain seemed out of sorts, his speech consistently slow and hesitant. She then realized she hadn't rested since the apocalypse began. This kind of fatigued piloting was tantamount to gambling with her life. But the captain insisted he was fine and refused to rest. Left with no other option, Molly called the old man and the bearded man to forcibly drag the captain out and persuade him to get some rest. Why are you sleeping here? I slept. However, they were inside for half an hour. By the time they opened the toilet door, the captain had already fainted. After Blackie diagnosed him, it was suspected that the captain's fainting was caused by a wound infection. He needed to land and find a hospital for surgery, otherwise his life would be in danger. Fortunately, the next stop was not far away. Jasmine and Chung Jing temporarily took over the captain's position. After a successful landing, everyone immediately divided up their tasks. Blackie, along with the mother and son and John, searched for a hospital to perform surgery on the captain as soon as possible. Johnson, along with the bearded man and the old man, searched for information about the shelter. With 2 hours left before sunrise, searching through so many documents was like finding a needle in a haystack. Just then, the old man discovered that there were cameras in the lobby. Perhaps by replaying the previous meeting, they could find information about the shelter's location. Johnson and bearded man stayed behind to continue searching for documents. The reason he stayed was to get revenge on bearded man. The two had been at odds on the plane, and now that they finally had a chance to be alone, it was time to settle their scores. However, they needed to find a legitimate reason. Knowing that bearded man was a patriot, he deliberately spoke ill of his country. Hello. Don't curse my father. You just sealed me with iron. I warned you what kind of man would seal you with iron. That person who sealed you with iron saved your skin. I saved your skin. We're leaving. We found what we needed and we're leaving. We have 40 minutes left. The bearded man, naturally unwilling to swallow this insult, immediately started fighting. They had long disliked each other, so neither held back. However, one was a NATO major general and the other a gang leader. Both were formidable fighters. After a few rounds, Johnson tried to get up and retaliate with his gun, but the bearded man refused. In the ensuing struggle, Johnson grabbed a nearby microphone and smashed it into the bearded man's chin with his left hand. Realizing he had made a grave mistake, Johnson rushed to the security room. Just then, the old man found the coordinates. When he asked about the bearded man's whereabouts, Johnson claimed the man had already left. The old man didn't think much of it, but when he reset the surveillance footage, he discovered the bearded man lying motionless on the ground. Feeling guilty, Johnson abruptly shut down the computer and urged the old man to leave quickly. Judging from the wound on Johnson's face, the old man had a rough idea of what had happened, but he chose to play dumb. Soon, the two drove back to the airport, and shortly after, the other teams also returned safely to their captains. However, during the head count, they discovered that the bearded man was the only one missing. Faced with the mother's questioning, the old man finally told the truth. Even then, Johnson still tried to argue and even attempted to shift the blame onto the old man. Just then, the captain reminded everyone to return to their seats. The sun would rise in half an hour, and they had to take off immediately. However, at the last moment, a car suddenly appeared in front of the runway. Then, to the captain's and his companions' shock, a bearded man covered in blood slowly got out of the car. In the end, Johnson was locked in the bunker. But now they faced another problem. The bunker was located a full 15 kilometers from the airport, and the sun would rise within half an hour of landing. Molly had also considered the possibility of not having a car, so she gave everyone a heads up beforehand. The moment the words "prepare for the hike" were uttered, panic erupted. After all, running 15 kilometers in half an hour was simply outrageous. But that was the reality. The plane was running low on fuel, and changing the destination now would mean certain death. The only way to survive was to grit their teeth and keep going, and that only applied if they couldn't find a vehicle. The probability wasn't actually that absolute. However, there was another thorny issue: what should be done with Johnson? Most people suggested leaving him on the plane to die, since he had not only killed the bearded man out of personal grudges but had also tried to lie and cover up the truth. This treacherous behavior had completely eroded everyone's trust in him. However, after discussion, the group gave the decision to the victim, the bearded man. But we let him keep his head. A dozen minutes later, the plane landed successfully. Due to the urgency, everyone immediately split into two groups to search for the car. Johnson, thinking the old man had saved him, hurriedly thanked him, only to be told that the bearded man had saved him. Johnson immediately felt extremely guilty. Meanwhile, Molly and the bearded man also luckily found the two military jeeps arranged by the director, both with full tanks of gas. After everyone got in the cars, Molly and the bearded man discussed the route, and the two groups set off in a grand procession. Molly was in front, and the bearded man was behind. However, when they were still 3 kilometers from their destination, the captain suddenly noticed that the car behind them had disappeared and reminded Molly to slow down and wait. But at this critical moment, she dared not slow down easily. The bearded man on the other side had indeed had an accident. Her nose had been bleeding profusely since earlier, and she was speaking incoherently. Before anyone could react, she suddenly foamed at the mouth. Although everyone was unharmed, the car was definitely totaled. It was a mystery what they were thinking, letting a seriously injured person drive. However, an even more pressing problem arose. With only 10 minutes until sunrise, they were trapped on a deserted road just 3 kilometers from the bunker. Everyone had to proceed on foot. Meanwhile, Molly and the others had reached the vicinity of the shelter. But as soon as the car entered, the gate closed. Seeing this, everyone hurriedly shouted for the car to stop. The captain, the first to reach the top, tried to stop the iron gate, only to find it equipped with a high-voltage pad. He was instantly electrocuted and thrown heavily to the ground, convulsing. Fortunately, the captain found the start switch. However, to his utter surprise, as soon as he released it, the steel gate closed again. Clearly, this switch required manual control, meaning someone had to stay in place and continuously hold it down to keep the gate open so the bearded man and his group could enter. This discovery plunged the group, whose hopes had just been rekindled, into another dilemma. Staying meant facing the imminent sunrise alone. After some thought, the captain asked the old man to unlock Johnson's handcuffs. However, Molly seemed to have other ideas. She insisted on unlocking Johnson's handcuffs herself. But after the others had walked away, Molly took advantage of Johnson's inattention and locked him next to the controller. "Hey, what are you doing? All you want is to protect your skin. Why do you expect us to protect other people's skin?" On the other side, the bearded man and his group reached a fork in the road, but due to his delirium, he forgot the route. Faced with the anxious inquiries of the others, he instinctively chose the left. However, the end of this road was an abandoned iron gate. The group realized they had taken the wrong path. Now they only had a few minutes left, and it was too late to turn back. The iron gate was also marked with a high-voltage warning. In a critical moment, they took off their shirts to cover the steel spikes at the top, and then found a car tire and placed it under the railing to create a makeshift circuit. As long as their feet were insulated from the ground and they did not touch the live and neutral wires at the same time, the current could not form a circuit in their bodies, so they would not be electrocuted. They quickly took a shortcut to the entrance of the treasure and met Molly, who was waiting outside. Meanwhile, as dawn broke, the pitiful Johnson waited in vain for the bearded man to appear and could only try to save himself. However, the control panel was firmly welded to the concrete, and unless he severed his own arm, there was no way to escape. On the other side, Molly and the others successfully entered the bunker. There were still dozens of survivors inside, but the other party said something meaningful. "We need your help." Thus concludes the first season of The Night. Firstly, in terms of character development, the author uses extreme events in a post-apocalyptic environment to showcase the multifaceted nature of humanity. Johnson, as a NATO major general, should have been a maintainer of order, but due to personal grudges and suspicions, he ruthlessly kills the bearded man and even attempts to lie to cover it up, revealing the selfish and impulsive side of human nature, ultimately paying the price with his life. The bearded man, although a gang leader and antiquities smuggler, shows a certain bottom line at crucial moments. Instead of retaliating against Johnson's betrayal, he advocates forgiveness. This complexity breaks down the black and white characterization, allowing the characters are more three-dimensional and realistic. The captain, despite extreme fatigue and infection, remains steadfast in his post, demonstrating responsibility and commitment. However, his health condition nearly leads to disaster, showcasing the vulnerability and resilience of ordinary people under extreme pressure. The mother's shift from gratitude towards the bearded man to wariness due to conflicting interests and moral considerations vividly reflects the wavering of human nature in different situations. The characters' actions and choices collectively construct a vivid panorama of humanity in a post-apocalyptic world, showing readers that even in dire circumstances, humanity is not simply good or evil, but rather a complex interplay of desires, emotions, and moral values. The final sentence of the story leaves one pondering. What difficulties did they actually encounter? Internal conflicts or a more terrifying external threat? Furthermore, the bearded man suddenly foamed at the mouth and became disoriented while driving. What is his physical condition? Is it a lingering effect from his fight with Johnson? Or is there another unknown reason? Will his health affect the team's subsequent actions? This remains an unsolved mystery. Regarding the specifics of the shelter, we currently only know its location. We know nothing about its internal structure, resource reserves, management model, or the backgrounds of the survivors. How will Jasmine and her group interact with the existing survivors after entering? Will they be accepted and integrated? Or will new conflicts arise due to issues such as resource allocation and power? These questions foreshadow the development of the second season story.